Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. It has been kind of a sort of hot minute since I've done a video. Taking one day off during the week, like after you post 2 days constantly, is kind of strange, but I really needed that break for my own mental health and I'm excited to get back into videos. I have done videos about book recommendations before. I'm mostly around Halloween, but I've also had some quick reads and good, fun, positive reads. I will link them above and below if you want to go check out those book recommendations. But one of my favorite videos to watch are the if you like this book, then try this one. Because I think when you have books that you just absolutely love and you find something that's very similar, chances are you're also going to like it. And I have a list of 7 books that I think are very similar to very beloved, infamous books on booktube, but I'm gonna try to pair them with some underrated or less talked about books so that you can also enjoy and widen your reading experience. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. First on my list, I am going to go with one of the ever most popular books, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. If you're not familiar with this book by chance, this basically follows a young girl named Feyre. I think she's about 19, and she is pretty much living in poverty with a very absent father, her mother who is deceased, and her 2 sisters who pretty much just kind of like give up and live in this like lifestyle. Feyre one day goes into the woods and she is looking to strike a kill, whether that's, for food or for pelts to sell, and she comes across a wolf. So she shoots the wolf and it ends up being a fairy. So a fae prince from the Spring Court ends up coming across into their town looking for her and takes her back into his kingdom as punishment for killing one of his beloved court members. And a kind of story unfolds from there. So this is pretty popular. It's known for a lot of twists and turns and varying love and settings and all that kind of stuff, and the fae is a prominent feature in this book. So if you liked this one, then I literally can guarantee that you will love A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. This book follows a young woman named Luella who is pretty much content with her life, making potions and remedies for her townsfolk, and she's kind of known as the healer. And she's content with living her best life there. She believes that she owes everything back to the town because they helped pay her way to be a college graduate and kind of learn all of these different concoctions. But in the beginning of the book, you find out that the Elf King, who is across the territory from their town and is almost connected between this like divide type of thing, the Elf King has been looking for his bride. He takes a new bride every 100 years because that's about how long the townspeople live in this world, and he comes looking for his queen because she is overdue. It's now been 102 years since the last queen was found, and their kingdom as well as their town, which are connected, are dying because of it, because the queen restores balance to both worlds. And lo and behold, right in the beginning of the book, you find out that someone suppressed Luella's magic and she is actually the elf queen. She's taken away to the elf kingdom where she kind of has to learn how to get along with this elf king and figure out how to use her magic so she can restore balance to both of the worlds. So as you can probably tell, in both of these books there are heavy elements of romance. They're fae-like creatures. This is the fae, this is elves. And in this book, there are mentions to other creatures such as fae and vampires and merfolk. There's also the whole love enemies to lovers type of romance where both women are kind of sort of taken against their will, not, really wanting to embark on a relationship. And in the end, both of them do find a relationship and figure out how to work within this new world that they live in. This one is a standalone, which is really nice. This one is part of a series, but I honestly think this book is pitched as for fans of A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I 100% agree that you should go read this one right now. My next recommendation comes for fans who like A Star Touch Queen by Roshni Chusky. So the Star Touch Queen is a bit of a Hades and Persephone retelling. Basically, you are following a woman named Maya. She is the princess of her kingdom and she is cursed. So for the most part, she's never kind of wanted. She is supposed to become the queen, but she is kind of like, as she's about to descend to the throne, her plots are kind of foiled, and she kind of gets exiled and is told that if she comes back, like, she is going to be executed. So she ends up kind of finding her own way to this underworld-like place, and in that time, she figures out what her destiny is meant to be. She falls in love and reclaims her kingdom, essentially. So I will preface this by saying that this book was not necessarily my favorite book to read. I was very confused while reading it, and there's just a lot of things where I still don't know what it is I read, which is why I'm having a hard time describing it in this video. But I know this is a really big favorite in booktube and on the internet in general. People loved this book. It is very flowery and poetic, but because of that reason, I struggled reading it in general. However, there were some really cool features in this book. Particularly, there was a like dead horse type of creature that I found was like, she was hilarious. Her name was Kamala, and Maya and her beloved, as he's introduced, I really liked their dynamic as well. But one particular area in this book was this whole idea of like a night bazaar, and how you would go into this thing and you can gather very unique objects, things that, like, you know, you can grab wishes and you can get like happiness, and other abstract ideas could be found in this night court. And for that reason, I am going to recommend Star Daughter by Shweta Thakrar. This is completely different in some regards, whereas Star Touch Queen is pretty much exclusively a high fantasy and it's in its own kingdom. This one does take place in our world as well as a cosmic realm, which is very cool. Basically, you have Sheetal, who is a daughter who lives in America, and she is the daughter of a mortal man and a star mother. So her mom ends up going back to the cosmos and this cosmic realm, and she doesn't really grapple with that well, but eventually she is called back to the stars and is supposed to be a champion to help her family remain the rulers in this realm. And there's a bit of fun and love, and it's very interesting because there's musical components, and honestly this was a very fun read. The reason that I'm going to compare it to the Star Touch Queen, basically both of these books have very rich culture, again non-European centric, and I really liked, even though they were different cultures, I really just liked how they were so unique and beautifully done in both of them. This also has a night bazaar piece to it, which is why I felt like when reading this one, some of those elements really reminded me of the Star Touch Queen. But I felt like this is a bit of a straightforward story rather than the Star Touch Queen, which was, again, a little bit confusing for me. And if you do like some more contemporary fantasy, I think this one is completely up your alley then. And you will definitely enjoy the descriptions and the unique environments that are in this world. Next, I'm going to talk about some interesting young adult books that kind of are like a bit of gothic, a bit of horror, a bit weird, and I enjoyed both of them. This one is Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Powers. I'm going to use this one, but I feel like both of these books are a little bit underrated, but I feel like Rory Powers is a little bit more well known for the genre, so that's why I'm going to recommend it this way. But of course, with all of these, you can probably go either way. If you've read one and you haven't read the other, it works both ways. Anywho, this follows a young woman who, after kind of being told her entire life that she has absolutely no family members and it's just her and her mother clearly is dealing with probably PTSD and depression and is very absent in this way, Margot essentially finds out that she does have a grandmother who is still living, and she kind of absconds her home to go find her grandmother and really just be a part of a family that she's always wanted. However, when she gets to her grandmother's farm, she realizes that not everything is as it seems, and she starts to wonder if maybe there are more reasons why her mother never returned home and never let her know all about this secret history that she had. And from there, you start kind of learning that there was like a fire and some dead children and a bunch of mystery that is surrounding her grandmother and her grandmother's farm. If you like this book, or just kind of weird stories in general, then I would recommend Horrid by Katrina Leno. In the same kind of vein of, you know, small town females returning home to like origins they don't really know about, Horrid also follows a young girl named Jane. After Jane's dad dies, all of a sudden, her mother and Jane decide to move back to her mother's old childhood home that Jane has never heard of and never really gotten any information on. Her mother has kept her history a secret, and Jane has always kind of wondered why she's never visited her grandparents or any people on the other side of the United States. So Jane returns, and once they kind of reclaim the estate and try to fix it up, weird things start happening, especially with the rose bushes and the home itself and the town, knowing that something was up with this family and at this home, but no one will tell Jane, and she has to figure it out on her own. So both of these stories have young protagonists returning to family roots that they have known nothing about, both kind of weird, and you're not really sure if there's a supernatural element or not in either of these. And there's just, I mean, who doesn't love a good like mystery family secret story? I personally love them. So honestly, I think both of these are pretty quick reads, and they're both super unique. And if you like one, I think you will like the other. Next on my list, I'm going to talk about a favorite of the book community and also one of my favorite reads of all time, and that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book follows a fictional band called Daisy Jones and the Six, and it is told in an interview format where the writer of the fake biography is interviewing all the band members to try to figure out why they broke up and kind of uncovering some of the band's secrets along the way. I personally think this is like one of my favorite books of all time, and the audiobook is like chef's kiss, amazing. But the reason that I think, you know, this is so popular is it's just done in such a way that's very compelling, especially because it's about a fictitious 70s band. And they were at the height of the like sex, drugs, and rock and roll era. So it's very much like an expose of this band as well. And for that reason, I'm going to recommend a kind of unique recommendation, but one that I think if you really just liked the whole idea of 70s sex, drugs, and rock and roll band expose type of story, then I think you would like The Heroine Diaries by Nikki Sixx. Even though Daisy Jones and the Six is fictitious, this book is very much a memoir / biography. This is told from the perspective of Nikki Sixx, who back in the 80s, at the height of the hair metal bands, Nikki Sixx was the bassist for Motley Crue, one of like the most famous 80s hair metal bands of all time, and to be honest, a band that I actually do enjoy, even though it was slightly a little bit before my time. I still rocked out. So the thing about this book is it is a memoir type of story where Nikki Sixx is talking about his entire account of the 80s and early 90s when he was very addicted to drugs. Hard drugs, liquor, anything you can name. He was kind of a spiraling mess and very much at the lowest point in his life. Again, this is a true story, so this could be triggering in some ways. It does talk heavily about his drug use and dying, literally being pronounced dead a few times and being revitalized. So it is a pretty like intense book, but it's so eye-opening to how this really does happen for people in the spotlight and when they kind of are riding a wave of success and not knowing how to deal with it. There's definitely some interesting accounts in here, but personally, I just think if you did like the fact that that was a fake band, then you should actually read something that actually happened in real life. The other really cool thing about this novel is that the Heroine Diaries, as the book is called, when this was coming out, Nikki Sixx, again, he is a musician, he actually started an entirely new band during this time called 6 a.m. And 6 a.m., for the release of this book, also released an entire album that is a soundtrack to this book. And it's exactly as it sounds, that it's called the Heroine Diaries soundtrack by 6 a.m. So while you're reading this book, you can literally go listen to songs that correlate with like the chapters. It is the coolest experience ever. These songs are very much aligned with how this goes, and it's all very impactful overall. So I think this is just such a cool recommendation. I don't ever see anyone talking about this book in any capacity. It might just be me because I'm an obsessive music lover, and I also do like a good 80s hair metal band. But I think, you know, if you want to learn more about that time and that culture and the rock and roll era, then this is a good book to go with. Next on the list, we are going to go back to young adult fantasy, and we are going to pull out another big hyped book on YouTube, which is Three Dark Crowns by Kendare Blake. I am obsessed with this series because we follow three sisters who are essentially groomed to take over the crown, but in order to do so at their 16th birthday, they have to enter a deadly competition and kill each other in order to secure their throne. This is how it's always been done on the island, and these three sisters all have different magical abilities and struggles with trying to reclaim the throne. But everything kind of isn't quite how it should be going, so it makes it a very interesting novel. This is super popular. I love the series. It's a 4-book series. And for that reason, I am going to recommend A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy. This one follows two sisters who are in a deadly competition to kill each other for the throne. As we could tell, correlation here. But this one has a little bit more of like African lore, and it's just very beautifully written. I also love the main characters and how they are so different. And with both of these books, there are kind of secrets, family secrets and like world secrets that are being kept from the sisters that could very much impact their decisions when they're trying to be sent into this battle. So personally, I don't really hear this one talked about a lot, but I loved this book so much when I read it. I almost couldn't put it down, and it really did remind me of Three Dark Crowns quite a lot. So you should go check it out. Next, I have another favorite young adult book, but I really do like young adult fantasy, and I'm not ashamed. And we're going to talk about The Cruel Prince, another hugely popular book by Holly Black that follows a young girl named Jude who has always grown up in the Fae world, because when she was a baby, her mother had been married to a high Fae with very big prominence in his court, and she eventually absconded when she was pregnant and had her half-Fae daughter, and then later got married to a mortal man and had 2 more children. And when the Fae male comes back looking for him, he ends up slaughtering both his ex-wife and her mortal husband, leaving all 3 children orphaned. So as a repayment to their deaths, he takes all 3 children and raises them in the Fae world. And Jude has always wanted to be Fae. She just wants to impress her adoptive father and the courts, and it always struggles. And with that, you have Prince Carden, who is like the ruler of the Fae, and is just very, very mean to her in particular because she is mortal. And there's a whole journey that's in this book. So this is going to be a little bit of an interesting comparison again, but I'm going to offer an older young adult Fae type of book. And that is Need by Carrie Jones. I'm going to preface this by saying that I have not read this book in a hot minute. But when I did read it, I was obsessed with it. So I won't lie, I don't know if this is going to hold up over time, because I'm pretty sure it was written in 2012. Oh, it was written in 2009. So I'm really dating myself a little bit. But I do think this was one of the better young adult books that I read at the time. But again, there's probably a lot of tropes in here because that era was filled with tropes that no one wants around anymore. However, this book follows a young girl who is kind of just like this quiet, introverted girl. She wants to be like an Amnesty International like worker one day, and she just has like a very humanitarian heart. And eventually weird things start happening around her. She gets shipped off to live with her grandmother in this kind of isolated town, and then lo and behold, when she's there, a pixie king comes to try to claim her, saying that she is supposed to be his bride and is half pixie. And there's kind of like a whole like adventure story from there. I don't know if Zara's gonna watch this video, but the main character's name in this book is Zara, so that's the only time that I know of any character named Zara. Anyway, so Zara is kind of, in a way, she reminds me of Jude a little bit, because even though she never grew up in this world, she is like a fighter and she will not give in. But also there's kind of like an allure to this prince and kind of a lot of deadly secrets as well. So they do kind of remind me of each other because you have like two books where you have a mortal world that crosses over into a plane of like the fae sort of thing. Also, the fact that there's pixies in this, I really like that because it's different kind of fae lore. And I think it's done really well, at least from what I can remember. But overall, I definitely think that there's going to be some tropes in this that are common from the late 2000s. But if you can get past those, this was definitely a fun adventure, and it's a 4-book series. And last but not least, I am going to give you a recommendation if you liked Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. So this book is pretty much following dual timelines where you have this young girl named Kaya when she's a kid, and she is struggling because she's pretty much been neglected for her entire life. Her family lives out in these swamps in like Louisiana, I think it is. And when she's out there, pretty much she is neglected and abused and underfed and doesn't go to school, and no one kind of remembers her except for like the few rare sightings. Eventually, all of her older siblings kind of wisen up and leave, but they never come back to save her, and her mother leaves as well, and she's just left with a dad who pretty much ignores her for most of her life. So you're following that timeline, and then you're following her as she's an adult, and she is on stand being accused of murder. And you're kind of following this story as you understand like how her past has shaped her to help you question whether or not she could have committed this murder. Is it justified if she did? Did she actually not do it because she learned all these different things growing up? It's a very nice comparison to kind of figure out like how she was connected to this murder case in the future. And I really loved it. I thought it was beautifully written, and personally, I do enjoy a good literary fiction story. So because of that reason, I am going to recommend The Fact of a Body by Alex Marzano-Lesnevich. This book is also a memoir. It's called A Murder and a Memoir as a subtitle. So this is also a real life book. Very similar to how I compared Daisy Jones and the Six with the Heroine Diaries. Where the Crawdads Sings is very fictional, but this book is very real. And the author of this book, who I believe did come out as trans at this point now, I'm just going to use they, them pronouns just so, you know, I make sure that I'm not saying the wrong ones because I don't know for certain. But basically, this author talks about how they grew up and they were significantly abused as a child. And when they get older, they started to pursue a degree in law. But during their internship, they are put on a case where a man is accused of abusing and then brutally murdering a young child. And during that internship, when they're sitting on the trial stand, they realize that this was not the job that they actually wanted to do. And it's basically sending them into a spiral of what actually happened to them as a kid. So there's again that kind of like then and now storyline. Again, though, this is real, so keep in mind for that when you're reading it, that this is a real story in someone's real life rather than a fictionalized story. But you're following them as they kind of start to weave through this murder case and start to kind of piece together how their own childhood happened and how that basically shaped them into deciding that they weren't meant to be a lawyer, and also grappling with some of their own identity and life issues, you know, trying to come out and trying to grapple with the fact that coming out is going to be polarizing for a lot of people in their life, because you either have people who are going to blame the trauma, or you're going to have people think that it's like a cop-out, or, you know, just not accepting at all. So it is a very hard to read story, but one that I think is so significant and important to do so. I actually do know the author a little bit. Like, I took a college course with the author, and I really did like their course, and I liked them as a person. So I was really happy to be able to support them. And honestly, I don't see anyone talking about this one, and I think people should, because it's a very powerful story. But with this in mind, I will say this definitely has some heavy trigger warnings for child abuse, sexual abuse, and murder. in general. So there is content like that in there. So just know going into it that if you are very sensitive to those topics, then I don't recommend it. It's not like straight in your face, but it's there still. All right, my friends, that is all the recommendations that I'm going to have for you today. I probably went a little bit more into detail than I intended to, but I do hope that you are taking away from this video some awesome and new recommendations that you might have never even heard of before. I normally post videos on Tuesdays and Fridays with the exception of last week, but I will be back into that schedule hopefully moving forward. I also live stream occasionally, and I do have a live stream coming up on January 30th at 7 p.m. on my channel if you'd like to join us. We are going to be doing some writing and productivity sprints. And overall, if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing because I want more people to kind of hang out with me. It's a fun time over here, even if we're pretty chill. So otherwise, guys, until the next video, I will see you then. Bye.